afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this talk. My name is Grace Murray. I'm head of public programs here at the Freer and Sackler. Again, thank you for joining us today. We are really delighted to have this opportunity to learn more about our current special exhibition over in the Sackler, Empresses of China's Forbidden City, 1644 to 1912. I hope you've had a chance to see it already. But if you haven't, the museum will be open until 5:30 today, so you can go see it after this talk. And as you can see, the exhibition dates are here on the slide. The exhibition will be open until June 23rd, so you have lots of time left to enjoy it. This is the first in a series of talks we're holding in conjunction with the exhibition. I wanted to let you know about the other talks we have coming up. Right here in the same place next week at the same time on Saturday, May 11th at 2 p.m., we will have a talk by historian Toby Meyer-Fong from Johns Hopkins University. Her talk will be about women of the Qing dynasty, history and fantasy, and it will be followed by a special screening of the first 2 episodes of the Chinese TV drama, The Story of Yanshe Palace, which explores some of the themes present in the Empresses exhibitions. We hope you'll join us next Saturday, both for that talk and screening. And then on Saturday, June 1st, we will be holding a gallery talk in the exhibition by Dr. Yang Cheng, who is an expert on the history of embroidery and textiles, and she'll be talking about some of the incredible robes and garments that are in the exhibition. Following that, on June 22nd, the final weekend of the exhibition, we will have a talk by Dr. Liana Chen of George Washington University, who's going to be speaking about court, theater, and politics in the Qing dynasty. So come back for that. And then the evening of June 22nd is the second annual Smithsonian Summer Solstice celebration. So all of the Smithsonian museums will be open late that night. You can enjoy the Empresses exhibition after hours. We will have food, Chinese opera performances, art making going on, special tours. So be sure to mark that weekend on your calendars. Just wanted to make the announcement to please silence your mobile phones before the talk starts. And I want to introduce our speakers. You can see their titles up on the screen, but Jan Stuart and Yiyou Wang are the co-curators of this exhibition. Jan Stuart is the Melvin R. Seiden Curator of Chinese Art here at the Freer Sackler, where she has worked for a number of years, leaving only to go to the British Museum, where she was the Keeper of Asia and department head before returning to the Freer Sackler in 2014. And Jan works broadly in the area of Chinese art with a special focus on ceramics, decorative arts, textiles, and court arts from the Song through the Qing dynasty. Yiyou Wang is currently the Robert N. Shapiro Curator of Chinese and East Asian Art at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, a specialist in Chinese contemporary art and later Chinese art, particularly imperial portraiture, textile, and lacquer. She also previously served here at the Freer and Sackler Gallery, where she contributed to a number of exhibitions. And we are very excited to share some news that in July, Daisy will be starting a new role as Deputy Director at the Palace Museum Hong Kong, a new museum currently under development in the West Kowloon Cultural District. So welcome to Jan and Daisy.
Well, to start with, we appreciate the lovely introduction. We appreciate that you've come to our talk. And we want to officially announce that we began this project as colleagues, quickly became sisters, then twin sisters, and now, as you see, we're Siamese twins. So we will be finishing each other's sentences, talking back and forth, and sharing some perspectives on how we came to the decision to create this exhibition, as well as talking a little bit about a few of the objects.
It's also for me lovely to come back to my old home. I was a staff member for almost 4 years, and also a postdoctoral fellow at Smithsonian. So it's wonderful to see all the new friends in the audience here today.
So we're going to take you into the world of Empresses. Here are 3 of our favorites, but we're not going to talk about them right now. We're going to instead give you a very short video to show you something about the complexities of installing some of the artwork in this exhibition. Andy, please. The video, please. So we will talk about that portrait in a little bit more detail, but what I hope you took away from watching that video is that was 24 hours of physical labor collapsed into 1 minute, that putting up some of these works of art is a phenomenal task that takes the specialists who handle the art and do this work a great deal of ingenuity, especially when it was discovered that the rigging and crane that was to be used so they could put the top of the frame on the painting didn't fit, and they had to improvise. So over and over again, one of the things that we learn as curators in choosing checklists for exhibitions and putting works on display is that it is teamwork, and it's a group of people working together to solve problems, and we think solve them well. So those individuals were fantastic heroes in this exhibition. That painting is 16 feet tall, and you see it, no, you don't see it. You see it on the screen now next to another painting that Daisy will talk about. But we chose these 2 paintings to start the talk because they are part of the impetus for creating this exhibition. How did we get the idea to do Empresses of China's Forbidden City? Want to take over for a minute? Or talk about these 2?
Go ahead.
Well, when we have these 2 paintings, Daisy and I first knew each other as colleagues. We're both specialists in the genre of portraiture. Daisy and I had a discussion about portraits, just as scholars talking. And then Daisy's talking about she has a portrait of a particular empress, Empress Shaoxian, in her museum collection. And I point out, which Daisy already knew from working here, is that we have this very large portrait of Empress Dowager Cixi, who died in 1908. With both of us representing museums that own portraits, and both of us wanting to, for our museums, create big, significant exhibitions that would be a joint project with the Palace Museum in Beijing, we said, there's a natural topic here. This is an area that has not been explored, the perspective of the life in the Forbidden City from the women, that their role has been totally understudied. So we thought we could work with our own collection, but as you'll see in our talk, it unfolded that we wanted to do something larger. But here, I wanted to show in context something about our portrait, and what would Cixi herself think? Her work was created for display in the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. Something striking to understand is that before this time period, this year, this portrait, no ruler of China, male or female, had ever had a portrait made for wide public dissemination. Unlike so many Western nations where rulers are on coins and banknotes or disseminate their images, that was not part of the Chinese tradition. So here is Empress Dowager Cixi, de facto ruler of China for 50 years, making the decision based partially on some information she had from knowing Western women, such as the wife of the ambassador to China at that time, Sarah Conger. She began to hear, too, that her contemporary, Queen Victoria, used dissemination of images of herself to relate to her public. It inspired Cixi to come up with a new idea and to have her portrait painted to be seen at the 1904 World's Fair by who knows how many thousands of people. Radical, courageous move, a radical, courageous thinker Cixi was. And who did she commission for the artwork? She commissioned a female American, Catherine Carl. Before Cixi's time, all of the court painters were men. So she's doing many new things simultaneously in this portrait. And what you see on the left is the original context in the World Fair. There were lots of Chinese things at the fair, tea and handicrafts, but there was no painting gallery, so it was displayed in the Gallery for American Painting. And she's there next to men such as the founder of the University of Chicago. So it's quite an unusual story that finishes up again with Cixi exercising strategic policy. She had the Chinese minister to the United States give this portrait to President Theodore Roosevelt. All as I can tell you is apparently he didn't think it looked good in the White House. And state gifts can be given by presidents to the Smithsonian. So it was first given to the American Art Museum and eventually came here to the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery. And for our exhibition, I think more people have seen the portrait than even in St. Louis. And secretly, I think Cixi would be very happy. But indeed, this portrait is one of the impetuses behind this exhibition.
There were three, I'm very loud, so that's okay. There were three routes.
Oh, wait a minute. Are you sure you can hear?
There were three routes that I would attribute it to that goes back to the Sackler galleries. One is somebody standing next to me. Jen Stewart is a pioneering scholar to study portraits for commemorative purposes, and she published and she also organized an exhibition called Worshipping the Ancestors. I'm sure some of you have seen that gorgeous exhibition, but really is the earliest, sort of the first exhibition, major exhibition on the subject. And when I was here, Jen actually went off to the British Museum, and I had a pleasure to study some of the portraits, but from a costume point of view, from a costume history point of view, in collaboration with the curator, textile curator from the Palace Museum, Mr. Yiyou, who came here on a fellowship and studied the portraits with me for 4 months. But also when I was here, I had the pleasure to meet Shirley Johnson. Some of you know her. She is a member of the board at the Sackler Galleries. She's also a very distinguished collector of Chinese imperial costume. So my weekend sort of entertainment is to go to her house, and at the time I knew nothing about Chinese textiles. And she would treat me like a kid in a candy store. She opened every boxes and tell me all about she knows. Very generous, share with me all the things and all her knowledge. So she's not here, but it's a mutual, surely is a mutual friend of both of us. So I thank her profusely. But also for those
And
of
her
you,
collection is coming to our museum.
for those of you who actually are familiar with the Franz Sackler archives, the archive is home to a large number of glass plate negatives of Empress Dowager Cixi. Some of the images you can see in this gallery, particularly the last gallery, you see basic reproduction of Cixi's black and white image. That's from the Franz Sackler archives. And back to 2012, David Hogue, at the time head of the archives, actually organized an exhibition about Cixi. So there are many sort of, looking back, there are many routes for this exhibition. But really, my love affair with the Empresses started with this portrait right now in the third gallery at the Sackler. This portrait depicts Empress Xiaoxian. She is the beloved and virtuous wife of Emperor Qianlong. So this is not from the Forbidden Cities collection. This portrait came from the Peabody Essex Museum's collection. The portrait came to the museum as a gift from a donor back to 1950s. At the time, it was in terrible condition to the point that in the past 60 years, we never had a chance to show it because there are creases, there were molds, there were foxing, all kinds of condition issues that we couldn't hang it in a gallery. So when I joined the Peabody Essex Museum back to 2012, the museum actually launched a conservation project, 2-year conservation project in collaboration with the Museum of Fine Arts Boston. So the conservators spent a lot of time with me to study this portrait. At the time, we didn't know whether this portrait was authentic, who this woman was, when this was painted, who painted, a lot of questions. But thanks to our research project, we were able to collaborate with painting curator at the Palace Museum. And together, we figured out the exact date, 1777, and we figured out the exact painters, 3 painters, one actually is German. And also, we figured out that the kind of the display context for this one, because this is not something you put in your living room with image of your beautiful wife to decorate it. But rather, this is a posthumous portrait, meaning that was painted long after this figure passed away and used and displayed in the rituals to honor her in the ancestral veneration rites. So I was very happy through this exhibition. We became detectives and we were able to go deeper into these women's lives.
So we decided, as we're going to go into women's lives, if we're going to work with the Palace Museum and do something big, we really needed a 3-way collaboration. It's enormously time-consuming and expensive to do a big exhibition. So we created a first-time collaboration between the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, the Palace Museum, and of course our own museum. There, standing in front of the castle, is a delegation of 5 Palace Museum dignitaries who came to the opening. So doing an exhibition like this was also considered a chance of soft power, cultural diplomacy, a way for China and the US to work together. We also wanted to be sure for both of our museums here that we could be pioneers in the topic. So there have been other exhibitions about treasures in the Forbidden City, about Qing dynasty treasures in the Forbidden City. But you will note the words. It does say, in the emperor's court. I could even tell you a favorite cake recipe from one of the emperors, but there is so much basic information about the empresses dowagers, who are the mothers of the emperor or a widow, very significant individuals with relatively little information recorded. So we came up with the idea that we could look at the things that were made for them to use, that were made about them, occasionally even made by them, to suss out more of their lives and their position at court. We also really took advantage of politics. So in 2016, Daisy and I went to Beijing and we participated in what was known as a people-to-people forum. It was a chance to publicly declare the topic of our exhibition in front of Secretary of State John Kerry and Vice Premier Liu Yandong. So we had the highest level people in the two countries hearing us promise we were going to create this exhibition. Wow, a sigh of relief. We were one of the fruits that was actually grown and delivered in time. So we had our opening here. This is the DCM of the Chinese Embassy, Li Kexin, coming to open and to say, yes, this exhibition is part of the 40th anniversary, a celebration of US-China diplomatic relations. So it was a big deal in the cultural sphere.
Also looking back to history, Friend Gallery at the time, Sackler, Freer Gallery play a major role in the US-China cultural relations. Some of you may remember before 1979, US-American citizens could not easily travel to China. But then what is also significant is in the year 1979, in January, Deng Xiaoping at the time, the Vice Premier of China, visited Washington, D.C. as part of the opening up of the relationship between two countries. While he was meeting with government officials and his wife, Zhuoling, visited the Freer Gallery. She was delighted to be shown around by, at the time, the director of Freer Gallery, Dr. Thomas Lawton, and we have historical photos in the archives.
So, the Qing emperors and empresses used art for political expression and political power, and guess what? So do modern museums. At least ours is soft power. And of course, we worked with the distinguished director of the Palace Museum, and we worked with our own distinguished directors, Dan Monroe, Julian Raby. All three of these men directors got excited about the topic of recognizing it's time to study women. I don't know though, maybe the women topic did them in. All three of them retired. So we wanted to get behind the walls of the Forbidden City. And walking in, we were centering on buildings like this, the Palace of Health and Longevity, that was the residence of a very important Empress Dowager. So we really tried to get inside the buildings.
And also for us, this exhibition, as well as the research, offer us an unprecedented opportunity to look at women's presence in daily life, in terms of objects, and also in terms of architecture. So this is not the usual map of the Forbidden City. If you go to Forbidden City, it's all colored. This is the map that we used in the gallery. We used it in the exhibition publication, the catalog, to show physically where were the women. So the colored areas were places where women lived or women visited or women were active. So you can visually see that they actually have a pretty good footprint.
Yeah, so we really wanted to make that point, that the women who are empresses and empress dowagers in the Qing dynasty, they don't have bound feet. They're ethnically Manchus or Mongols. They have full-size feet. They have mobility. In fact, some of them rode horses. But by just showing you their presence in the Forbidden City, we wanted to dispel any lingering notions that these were uneducated, totally cloistered, sequestered women. They had very strict boundaries of where they could go, who they could be seen by, but they were not living in a tiny capsule. They actually traveled with the emperor on tours that he took around the nation. So we're looking at active, intelligent women.
But the process of discovery is very challenging. It's not easy.
And so, indeed, we had to specially commission even this map. So here we are, hard at work. It's irresistible, but indeed, we were given very great and special treatment by our colleagues in the Palace Museum. And it is so large that if you're there on a Monday doing work, they'll let you have one of the staff bikes to get around to our viewing sessions.
And over the years, we became the best friends with Palace Museum colleagues. And each time we went there, we worked hard, but also feeling like a vacations, right?
Right? And you'll notice how heavy Daisy's bag is. We took every catalog, every published by the Freer Sackler or the Peabody Essex Museum as part of exchanges.
And over time, we worked probably with 200 colleagues at the Palace Museum from every possible department.
And it's a cheat, but we did try to bring the director together with the Empress. That is a portrait in his museum. And really, he did become very enthusiastic about the topic.
The exhibition planning process began about 5 years ago. At the time, there was
4 years ago, don't exaggerate.
We started early because the show actually opened at the Peabody Essex Museum 6 months before it traveled here. So I just want to add a little bit more time there. But way back, there was very little traces of Me Too movement. But look at what the press has picked up about this exhibition. The key words is female power, power of women.
And it is something that we always try to nuance because power is a very strong term. And for a lot of these women, their power was covert, it was in the family. It wasn't until the last Empress Dowager, the one we looked at the 16-foot painting of, Cixi, that power was more directly in her hands, more analogous to the way we think of power today. But when you think of all the significant roles that these women played in shaping court history, it's very important, and clearly they did have a kind of power. We wanted a long-term outcome, so we produced a catalog. And this is the cover of the book with a detail. Now, I ask, when is the last time you saw a woman as the cover of a major exhibition catalog? Doesn't happen often. And now I really ask you, when is the last time the woman on the cover was 80 years old? So Daisy and I very intentionally chose a cover image that would make the point that the status and importance of women in the Qing court wasn't tied with ephemeral youthful beauty. Stature has to do with your experience and what you do, and you do get respect with your generational position. So age is a good thing.
Another reason for us to select this image is that the Palace Museum actually provided stunning high-res images. You can see her eyebrows, her eyelashes, all the details.
And in fact, making photographs.
And for this special catalog, we got so many compliments about the high-quality images in the catalog. So we have to thank our colleagues at the Palace Museum. For this special project, before the Chinese New Year, they rushed to actually created about 100 new images with a huge team there.
And this is what we're bringing it up. It's part of the curator's perspective. Some of the challenges you have in doing an exhibition are suddenly finding out, oh, they don't have the high-level photographs of the images that we want to borrow, because many of the things we wanted to borrow, no one else has ever borrowed. So you have all sorts of little pitfalls along the way of discovering, oh no, how are we going to get that accomplished? And so it was fantastic, their care and concern. Part of what makes you want to do an exhibition is that you might discover something. So Daisy showed the image of the portrait that is in her museum, Empress Xiaoxian, who died in 1748. She was an empress that her emperor truly loved. There are all these records that he even was depressed when she died, that he visited her coffin 50 times within the first 3 months after her death. But we're doing an art exhibition. We're focusing on art. How can we prove a love story in beautiful objects? So we started talking to our colleagues. We said, all right, we know there isn't going to be something exactly analogous to a love letter, but that's really what we're after. And they thought, and they thought, and then they said, we have an elegy written by the emperor shortly after his wife's death. All his own poetry, all written in his own hand, written on a very special antique paper that was saved usually to write Brutus scriptures, and instead he wrote the elegy to his wife.
And also, we worked with a team of other colleagues in both museums to really think about how can we actually engage our visitors. Many people have never heard about Qing, Qing dynasty, and many people are not familiar with Chinese arts and culture. So how can we actually not just show off their splendid material world, but also to help them to get insight of their emotional landscape, and also help people to connect at a personal level with those personalities, I think is really key to our curatorial directions. So this really fit the bill.
So go in the exhibition and read the translation of the poem that our colleague did for us. And you will read lines like, I went into the bedchamber, I went behind the phoenix bed curtains, to no avail, I inhaled sadness. There's genuine love. We can't document emotions real time between any of the emperors and empresses because none of the documents give you that. But we can, through document like this, understand that at least in some of these imperial marriages, there was a quality that we would call love. There were emotions. These are not just empty characters.
In addition to display the emperor's material world and emotional landscape, but also we want to give depth and give scope to the exhibition, so we also will be able to source objects associated with the spiritual life.
So, spiritual life. Here, you're seeing an amazing volume from a Buddhist text. The Kanjur Sutra is recording all the words of Buddha in Tibetan language. A prevalent religion at the Qing court was Tibetan Buddhism. And in fact, the first most instrumental person in the court to bring this faith into the court was an empress, Empress Shaozhuang, who died in 1688. So we have this very deep connection between spiritual objects and women of the court. Discovering, getting, and of course, another beautiful four-armed Guanyin statue. But the sutra is the one I want you to focus on because here it is as you can see it in the museum today. Our process allowed us to see it as it first came out of storage. So how did we build our checklist? How did we say what we wanted? We went through every publication that there was of Palace Museum material and kept putting little Post-its by all the photos. Oh, we think we want this, we think we want this, finding a connection to a woman, making the story that we wanted. But then we also wanted other things that might not be published. So after they had a sense of what we were after, with curators, such as this wonderful gentleman here, who's one of the lead curators working with us, we were able to say, show us things that aren't published yet, that aren't recorded. And we were able to get this sutra. And this is how it's wrapped.
And it's also a very special privilege that was granted to us because as a common scholar, you could not actually request anything, even for museum curators, and you have go through all the elaborate approval process. I think there's a quota system, right? Max is 10 to 20 pieces per year, each person.
So we got more than that as outside curators. And here you see two members of our museum team, one from Peabody, Essex, and one from Freer Sackler. We were allowed to go into the storeroom with designers and registrars to look and study these objects in terms of how they would be displayed. What kinds of cases would they need? What kinds of mounts would they need?
For registrars, they have to note every condition issues as a part of the very rigorous documentation process.
But we didn't get to see everything. Some things we took on faith from our colleagues' advice. Our viewing sessions were short. So here still, you're seeing this very same sutra as it's being unfolded, all of the layers of silk and textile that are part of it. You see on view the red lacquer cover, but you'll see we have this on the table, we have this sensor on the table, and we have this fan on the table. All these things we would be given 20 minutes to look at, to study, and this was in preparation for writing our catalog. So we call curator's perspective on an exhibition how you can have one Excedrin headache after another. How do you see enough, get enough in 20 minutes? But we did because we also worked with the greatest of teams.
And also, what I benefit from the viewing session is my note-taking skill in this way, because we're not supposed to take any documentation research photographs. So take good notes, do quick drawings in 5 minutes for each object. So I learned a lot.
And in the end, they let us take a few of these shots so we could enliven our lectures. I just want to briefly talk about this robe. This is how it looks on display. But I think I certainly act like a mother who's not supposed to have any favorite children, but sometimes I really do have favorites. And this robe is just stunning. And here in this talk, it's exemplifying the fact that we were able to get things that have not been shown in other places and that really stand out and tell stories about the Qing court that are quite exceptional. Now, there is a style of robe that's a part of Qing women's lives that does have 8 auspicious images on a robe. So here, 3 on the shoulders and 3 on the back. This total of 8, 8 is a lucky number. 8, there are 8 Buddhist symbols that's auspicious. There are 8 directions. There are 8 sounds like the word for to expand, so it can mean expanding good wishes. So there is a style of robe that has 8 decorations, sometimes dragons, things that are obvious imperial power and luck. But here, these flowers are shown in the most beautiful embroidery and shown in incredible vases. Now, first of all, we have a chart that shows all the meanings. Each and every combination of flowers in a vase makes a good meaning. So when you look at begonia, the word in Chinese for begonia includes a word that means the same thing as sea, as in C-E-A. So you suddenly have a begonia in a vase. The word for vase is a homophone for the word for peace. And you suddenly have peace in the 4 C's, or the universe. So not only is it a reference to there being peace in the life of the wearer, the empress who wore this robe, but it's a sense then of saying a properly run court with a properly run emperor and empress in harmony is a harmonious world. It's a way of even what you wear for a semi-formal occasion can be substantiating the idea of successful rule of the Qing court. So every moment of the woman's life was involved in thinking about aggrandizing the court and also bringing good luck to herself. The details are phenomenal. So I can't stay long here, but what I want you to focus at for a minute is look at how specific the embroidery is. These are every vessel, the 8 vessels on this robe, all imitate vessels that were made in the 18th century. And they're all vessels of the type that the empress would have had in her own residence. So it's almost as if she was dressed in her own world, wearing her room about her. And this suggests to me that although I cannot prove it, maybe there was a beginning of some agency of the woman in requesting what kind of dress she wanted. The patterns, the idea of 8 vases is standard, but this depiction goes to another level. We know late with the 19th century with Cixi that she was active in fashion. But we're using some of the research in this exhibition to let us try to speculate about more agency among these women than has been previously thought. So keep that image in your mind, and this is the kind of image it came from. Look how standard and generic that porcelain vase is. This was a robe that was excavated, worn by a high princess. So we go from a standard pattern to something exceptional in the middle of the Qing. And that robe, I believe, that we just saw here, I believe was worn by the mother of the Qianlong emperor, worn by Empress Dowager Chongqing, a very highly regarded woman.
For those of you who are interested in learn more about this gorgeous robe and Jen's research on textile and jewelry, you can purchase a Arts of Asia special issue devoted to the empresses available in the gift shop.
And I'll note that the better article is by Daisy.
One of the challenges, we have many challenges, but one of the challenges from the research point of view is how do you know a particular object is associated with women, used by women or commissioned for women or made by women? Portraits, easy. You look at, this is Empress Dowager Chongqing, this is Empress Xiaoxian, it's easy. But for objects like this gold ewer, the wine container, how do you know it's actually used by women? Because for the most part, if you look at all these objects, there's no tags telling you who was the owner. So how do we know? One of the clues we used during our research is we go into the archival records, imperial archival records. There were workshop records. There are also inventory records, particularly for this year. It was documented in the 1920s. At the time, the Forbidden City was being transformed into a modern museum called the Palace Museum because the last emperor, Puyi, and his wife were kicked out from their home, the Forbidden City. So at the time, the Palace Museum conducted a survey of their collection. They have a very ingenious inventory system. Each record, each object has a number. The number can be divided into 2 parts. The first part tells you, if you're lucky, you have the code, you can decode it. It will tell you where this object was when they conducted the survey. For this object, it was actually stored at the time in a women's quarter after we received the code from our Palace Museum colleague. So we have 1 clue, but that's not enough. In past 300 years or so, objects moved around all the time inside the Forbidden City. So we were very lucky. So on the right-hand side of the screen is a detail from a large painting depicting the 80th birthday banquet hosted in honor of Empress Dowager Chongqing, Qianlong's beloved mother. And we were able to find this incredible detail. So if you look deeper, look at the yours depicted. Actually, there's a detail of a woman holding her boy in the garden. Did you notice the correspondence? So from that moment, we're like, oh my God, we have more evidence to show that high-ranking women inside the Forbidden City could use a sumptuous yurt like that. But previously, scholar has challenged us. Many scholars told us, are you sure, Jen and Daisy, you want to do an exhibition about palace women? Because conventionally, we believe that the best objects in the collection of Palace Museum were reserved for men, meaning the emperors. So you are going to do a second-rate art exhibition? Are you sure? So by using this example, we can prove this is a class, actually grade 1 object, which means it is amongst the rarest and the most special objects in the entire collection. We were able to prove that high-ranking women had the privilege to use some of the best art objects, and this exhibition is not a second-rate art exhibition.
So over and over, we were able to prove that.
Okay, maybe skip. Okay. Well, here comes to the devils. Well, you know, we had a lot of fun hanging out with colleagues. We had a lot of fun looking at beautiful objects, but here comes the headache, the logistics. So this, I don't expect you to read everything, but this gives you a snapshot about the details, the level of details of exhibition planning. Every day, there's some kind of meeting, there's some kind of deadline, and you have to meet the deadline. From registration to shipping, to catalog, to installation, we have something we call military drill right here.
We won an award for having the exhibition with the most number of endangered species, which means every single one has to be registered with our Fish and Wildlife and with a Chinese counterpart to make sure they are all antiques that are being properly exported. So we have tortoiseshell, we have ivory, it goes on and on. So yes, lots of details.
And our poor colleagues, we had fun, we ride bicycles, but our poor colleagues at the Palace Museum and our registrars had to actually meet there about a year ago. The hottest season in Beijing is July. So they spent 3 to 4 weeks in Beijing checking condition of every object, work with a shipping company, insurance company to make sure everything has a special case and then has special crate and everything is in good order and they're safe to travel. And they work so hard together, and this is the day they finish all the packing and the crates. They're so happy, as you can see, and so relieved.
So here you see them unrolling a painting, which is this one. Here you see the hem. So they're working on condition checking.
Inside the Forbidden City on the left.
And then that's to enable it to travel here. This is what installation looks like. And an installation crew will consist of our own expert staff and expert staff sent from the Palace Museum. So here we have actually a very senior member of the painting department in the Palace Museum doing the final hands-on unrolling. But you get the sense of how large that painting is.
And also we were told this exhibition also broke record in terms of how many large-scale objects could travel to one venue. And this would count as a large object.
So the power of women. We had lots of exciting discoveries. This little object, which is a perfumer for perfuming your room or your clothing, that's in the exhibition, including with a shot of its archival tag from how it was archived in the 18th century. So beautiful, beautiful details and objects.
Well, this is not my house. These are gallery floor plans at each venue, both at the Peabody Essex Museum and at the Sackler. So this is our roadmap when it comes to exhibition design, when it comes to installation. And as you can see, that hundreds of versions has been produced. So each day, we actually made some modification and a refinement. And I show you actually something. I use my iPhone on my desk, showing that we make a lot of changes by hand as well.
And with our stunning 2-floor plan, I can remember after sharing all my ideas of how I wanted to group things and the designer working on it, he came back to me, and here he is in the next shot. This is the designer, Jeremy Galloway, brilliant designer, and he said, all right, Jan, these are the 20 objects that you'll have to eliminate because they don't fit. And I think I must have fainted. I said, no, Jer, we will solve it. And so you come up with ingenious ways to group things and to retell the story so that it will flow and look beautiful and logical and intelligent, but it will fit everything.
On the left is my designer at Peabody Essex Museum, Dave Cyber, and also exhibition manager, Karen Ceballos. And they actually started a new venture because of the Empresses, because in our design, we use a lot of curtains. We use a lot of gauze as a spatial division devices. So they actually, they went shopping for fabric.
And here you also see the head of our conservation, Donna Strand. So every aspect of the exhibition takes a team of people.
Well, this is what the designer has to live in the past couple of years, every day, is that in addition to the floor plan, each object has a case drawing, showing you different views. Again, thanks to all the software, they were able to, doing everything on computer, but showing you everything has a case, and each object which require a mount. Also, you have to design and detail the mount making in your drawing. So this is the level of the details that involved in their work in collaboration with curators, registrars as well, and conservators.
After they design the mount, they have to draw it and send it back to the Palace Museum for approval. And approval whether the angle is just right or too high. So you can see actually working on this for only 4 years was really a short time. One of our largest objects, the first one you'll see when you go in, everybody asked me, how was that moved? It comes apart. So it still, again, took 6 individuals and a lot of time, but piece by piece, it gets displayed. The same thing with this gigantic painting. This is a large blown-up detail. This is a consort or wife with a young child who became the chosen heir apparent. Very beautiful painting, but look at the size of it, and the installation was so complex. So we just wanted to share some sense of what it's like to put it together.
For each installation, deinstallation, it's required that we had 4 or 5 Palace Museum colleagues as couriers coming here, from Sackler and Peabody Essex Museum, to supervise and to collaborate with us on installation or deinstallation. So here that we all become best friends, showing that these are colleagues, they're not conservators, but they have to be very versatile. You have a curator there and start dusting one object, and you have a textile curator trying to invent a new method to install the court necklace in the most symmetrical way.
So in summary, we wanted to show you the team of people. So from each of our museums. And that's not everyone. That's installation teams in the 2 museums.
At the Peabody Essex Museum, we actually counted about 70 staff members were directly involved in this project.
Same here. So we're going to conclude by, again, trying to explicate the wonder, the fascination of putting together such a complex project. We're going to be showing a video of installing this gold stupa. But there are a few words to say about the stupa. Made in 1777, it was commemorating the mother of the Qianlong emperor. So the emperor makes this to honor his mother, and it's a reliquary. He has some clippings of her hair enshrined in this stupa that also has the Amitayas Buddha, the Buddha of infinite life. This object is iconic. It is on permanent view in the Palace Museum. Daisy and I had it on our wish list. We hinted around in the beginning. It was like, forget it, it's on view. We're stubborn. We hinted it around again and again, but we thought we might not get it. We went to the Palace Museum on one of our 8 trips together, and it was the day after President Trump had been in the Forbidden City. Because of his visit, for his convenience, the Palace Museum had taken this stupa off its regular display and put it in a special viewing room. Daisy and I were taken to that viewing room so we could see it better up close. We seized on the moment. We said, now it's no longer on permanent view in your gallery. And this is the 40th anniversary celebrating the renewal of US-China diplomatic relations. Wouldn't this be the time to make the one-time loan abroad? So we want to show you a very short video to give you a sense of how this was installed. Andy, please.
Yeah, sure. A couple of words before we see it is that the object weighs about 237 pounds, just the metal part, not including the hardwood, heavy stand. And how actually we shipped it, think about IKEA furniture, you ship it in parts. So this metal part could be taken apart into about a dozen components, and each has a special box, and then together we put it in a couple of crates. So that's how they shipped here. So when we actually, the video is going to show you is how we actually put together at the Peabody Essex Museum's gallery. So we took each component out and then try to, just from the bottom part, stack, tier by tier. And as you can see, even from this image, it's symmetrical. So how do you know which actually face in front? So we were just, scratching our head, and we found out back to 18th century when it was built, people already figured this out. The artisans inscribed the Chinese character zheng, means front, in the interior of each component, which might confuse you. So that means they also face a similar problem of shipping and moving things around and putting things together and putting things apart. So that is, come to me as a very powerful connection. I can talk with people 200 years ago. So let's see what's going on in our gallery. The video, please. Very tall guy.
And it might be nice to share that this is the first time installing this object has ever been videoed and shared widely. So just like Empress Dowager Cixi was the first to create an image that could be shared broadly with the American public, this exhibition has also created ways to look at things for the first time in America. So thank you very much. And we're happy to take some questions.
Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? No?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really interesting and fascinating. I just wanted to know, we haven't seen the exhibit yet. We are going to do that now. Are there anything you would recommend we don't miss?
You must see it all. What are your favorites?
I would say if you have 5 minutes, don't miss this huge gold thing there in front of you.
I would say don't miss the gigantic portrait that we showed you, the men standing on ladders as it's being unrolled. So that's towards the beginning. The stupa's towards the end, so you'll have to go through it all.
Another highlight of this exhibition is this exhibition presents the largest assemblage of imperial court textile and jewelry ever traveled to the United States. So don't miss this opportunity if you're a fashionista.
It is about 135 objects. So depending on how much time you have, don't spend all your time in the beginning if you have to leave before 5:30. It really, people who look carefully take almost 2 hours. People who have an hour end up enjoying it, but they have to make decisions what to look at carefully and what not to.
My advice would be, if you have time, if you're lucky to be living around, come back many times. Because I can assure you, your head will be exploding after walking around for a little bit.
Just wondering, were there any industrial standards shipping and installing all those artifacts? For example, like is cleanness required? For example, clean room, gowns and everything, or that's because I couldn't help watching the gentleman there was t-shirt and everything because if when moving 200 pounds metal, you sweat. What's going to happen if it's dripping on the artifact?
I would say this is not space station work. Actually, we do hold the highest professional standards, but it's not hospital or space station. Yes, we wear gloves for the most part.
See the black gloves on his hands?
And also, you have to consider that people have to feel comfortable. If you wear very rigid uniform, that people may not feel comfortable walking or handle things. So our rule of thumb is wear clean things and really dress very comfortably. And we also wear masks when it's necessary as well.
And it is the gloves that are usually the most essential because when you're handling art, it is the sweat, the perspiration, the oils from your hands that can be deadly to certain kinds of art. But everybody involved in the team is also working always, art conservators are present during installation, and always members of both museum, the museum where it's being installed and the Chinese Palace Museum. So you'll have experts from each side monitoring everything.
I see other hands.
First, thanks for sharing this all the great stories. So one very interesting part you mentioned, try to present all those artifacts here and sort of talk to the designer of there are some of the remaining pieces not there. So I'm wondering what is the final story. So have we seen everything shipped to the US now, or there's some of the...
Yes, you are seeing everything.
Perfect, okay.
The designer realized that I was serious. We were going to get it all in. So sometimes the designer would originally say, well, I would spread these 2 objects out farther. And I'd say, no, I like them close together because then I can fit a 3rd one that goes with them. And my justification for that was Qing palace taste. We do know something about the taste of the time. And it was an environment that was densely packed. It was the antithesis of the Bauhaus. The minimalist trend of 20th century was not Qing taste. So then my designer was he said, all right, if it's honest to the objects, and he is so good with colors and space and turning things that we were able to make it work.
Thank you.
Another story about installation and casework is in many exhibitions, there are cases when you design a casework, it usually takes few weeks to make the case, and something happened in between is that sometimes we did not get the correct measurements, so it won't fit. You realize that, oh my God, the object is bigger than your case. And for this exhibition, we are very, very proud to say that we worked so hard to make sure all the measurements were accurate and every case fit. It's very rare.
I've been through the exhibition a couple of times, both at the Peabody and here, and it's wonderful, so thank you again for your work. I had a question about the portraits. You have a number which are, for us, a view of the women as they were portrayed at various points in their life, and I was wondering what strands you see in terms of the painting. How much choice did they have in how they were depicted? They were court painters, presumably, that they would have been painted by, but did they have choices about how they were depicted? Was there a standard format? I'm curious about the portraits themselves, since it's the only glimpse we kind of get, other than the objects, the way they lived. Thank you.
It's very ritualized. There are requirements. I'll let Daisy for a minute talk about ancestral veneration portraits. We have other portraits, a commemorative portrait of a woman's 80th birthday. The emperor had a very precise formula that was based on the image that they wanted to create of the court, and often some of these images of women could be paired with an image of the emperor. So there are formulas going on in a lot of them. There's very little evidence that these empresses had agency in terms of such as saying, I would like my portrait painted. We believe that these commissions are the emperor, not the empress, making the commission.
One limitation we encounter as a research is the source materials. So how do you know the agency, right? One of the key primary source we went to is the Imperial Workshop archives. So that is about the commissioning process. And I do believe that before Cixi's time, all the records came from the emperor's edict, meaning that you don't see direct agency of women in terms of commissioning these portraits. But that's part of the history because we only know through textual documents. There's no video recording or anything, right? But several trends, as you mentioned, I would observe is, first of all, before Cixi's time, all the painters, court painters for these portraits were male. And Cixi was the first imperial person actually to engage female court painters, including American female court painter, Catherine Carr. So that's kind of really interesting gender association. Another thing I notice is there's huge difference between 18th century and the late 19th century, early 20th century portraiture. As Jen mentioned, usually look at those earlier portraits, very stylized, and they have frontal view. But you do see later on, particularly look at hands and feet. Previously, if you look at Empress Dowager Chongqing's portrait or Empress Xiaoxian's portrait in the galleries, they have hands and feet, but you don't see them. They were hidden, depicted in the portrait. But then when you look at particularly early 20th century portraiture, both photographic and pictorial, hands and feet, you see more. So I do believe there is not just Cixi's female agency, but perhaps that indicates there's more relaxed attitude towards depiction of female body parts, particularly in terms of female decorum, because that's previously they basically the hands were not shown because of the female decorum.
But it really is Cixi who changed things. She's the one who also made commissions to have herself shown portraying the Bodhisattva of compassion, being Guanyin, which she was performing actually in very, very small operas for a select group in the court. So she would actually commission images of herself playing in that kind of opera. That is a new phenomenon.
I see two hands here.
I know that I've seen a few of the objects so far, and they're beautifully clean and sparkly, and I'm wondering what the curators in Beijing, is that the same kind of aesthetic that they have, or do they like a little bit of patina? And what happened when there was a kind of a conflict, or when you decided you'd have to go with them, or you'd have to persuade them that you were more appropriate?
It's a great question. I think that Palace Museum, particularly in recent years, having invested quite a bit to beef up their conservation effort. They established recent years a place called Cultural Heritage Hospital. Basically, it's a conservation studio, new facility, really impressive staff members. So they're doing a lot. But for us, it's our decision also to decide which object we want to borrow. And one of the key criteria is that have to be in good condition, so we can ship them safely and pack them safely. But also the rule is that we here, working for American institutions, we were not allowed to actually touch their objects. Any conservation work has to be pre-communicated with them, and then with their permission, we could do something, but happily, we haven't done much.
And there are minor differences. You may have been going through the exhibition with an eagle eye, and you may occasionally see in a white substance an inventory number painted on one of the objects. And you would think, oh, well, if that belonged to a Western museum, they would take that inventory number off and write it in a hidden place, or even take it off during the time of exhibition. In China, the philosophy is different. The number was written earlier, and it'll stay there. So these are tiny, tiny differences, but when there is a tiny difference, you just go with their way.
So if there's a dead bug, for example, you're going to remove that before...
If there's a dead bug, that will be removed, yes. But if there's a particular inventory mark that's in a place where a Western museum would not have it when the object's on display, but their custom is to have it on display, it'll stay on display.
But also, I would say that despite the differences or approaches, on the floor, both teams work extremely well and collaboratively. So we are very happy about the outcome.
And they certainly let us handle the objects together with them under the right context. But they are very hands-on, which is wonderful. And just so you know, when we lend things to other places, we're always very hands-on too.
I'm a docent here, so I like to provide some feedback from what we heard from the audience, and also have a question related to this. The most praising feedback we got is in our visitors. There's quite a few Manchu people, and most of my visitors are Chinese. What they told me is this exhibition told them a lot more about the Qing dynasty and the history that they don't even know. They also said that they've been to the Forbidden City many times and they took tours there. They think our exhibition is superior. So that also made me feel good, is they think our tour is more informative and more interesting than their tours. So, so the related question is, to me, this 135 pieces is like a bunch of beautiful pearls. And you two, together with the Palace Museum staff, really use a beautiful thread, put it into a necklace. And the thread, I think, is the history. I think each of the rooms and the whole thing, including your category, the catalog is embedded so deeply with the Qing Dynasty history and even the impact till today. So my question is, how did you choose the theme of each room, and how did you put the thing together so richly, not only just display of 100 more plus pieces of beautiful objects, but really put it almost like a history class for the audience?
Well, I think we partially did that because when we first were developing our checklist, already then we were asking ourselves, what are the main topics we want to cover? So I think as we went into choosing objects, we already had an idea of what were some of the main aspects that we wanted to be able to explicate. And those were also aspects that we were going to use for chapters in the catalog and such. So no exhibition can totally follow a catalog because, of course, you've got physical spaces. But we had already roughed out what were key parts of history that had to be told, and we also kept asking ourselves, what are some of the stereotypes that people are likely to have, such as the fact that many Americans think that empresses of the Qing dynasty, the last dynasty of China, would have bound feet. And we wanted to be sure people understood Manchus never bound their feet. So we both, from the beginning said, we want socks and boots and shoes. So some of the things that we chose, we knew there were points, and we wanted to break the stereotype that the women were completely passive. So we would ask ourselves, what is it important to tell, and then we would help find the objects. But we would also look at lots of objects and then ask ourselves, what are these objects telling us? So what are they telling us about the variety of clothing they wore and such? So we were also interrogating the objects and letting them tell us what to do.
And also I think that as a curator, it's slightly different from a book author because we want to make sure that this exhibition is accessible to the broadest band of audience, meaning that people have no background in Chinese history, Chinese art, or China in general can appreciate, can find points of relevance and points of entry. So I think that if you look at some of the most important themes, for example, wedding, you don't have to go to China to understand what is wedding. Birthday celebrations, death, love, power. I think that we want to have those broad brushstrokes that everybody can feel connected to. But also, like Jen mentioned, I think that it's a balancing act, is that you also have chronology. Qing Dynasty have 260 some years. You could potentially, sequence your exhibition based on timeline, right? You could also potentially organize your exhibition based on characters. For example, Cixi, for example, Empress Dowager Chongqing, Qianlu's mother or his wife. But I think, eventually we come up with a mixed model that, start with very accessible, very broad themes, such as wedding. And then behind that we actually were able to say, okay, this wedding is associated with Empress Dowager Cixi and the bride. So we tell people's story. So in general, I think that if you have accessible theme, you have interesting characters, you have amazing objects, people will enjoy it.
And you have to have good designers because they weren't identical in the two museums because the physical space is different.
Okay, so we have time for one more question.
In reference to what you just said, my husband and I live very close to the Peabody Essex Museum, and I think we were there 5 times.
Oh, thank you.
To view the exhibit. It became very addictive. We came to bring friends, family, anyone we could talk to about it.
Thank you.
We wanted to bring them to share it, and we are here today. So I want to ask when the pieces will be returned to Beijing.
Their last day here is June 23rd. And the night of the 22nd, the museum is open quite late, so you'll have extra hours to see them.
And also, I thank you profoundly for being a big fan of the Empress and come with the tour. And, but also I want to mention that we have not heard any plans that the exhibition will go back to China in the form of exhibition. Objects will be returned. So I think that, you know, all of us have to seize the opportunity, including myself, to study and to relish these beautiful objects.
Thank you so much, Jan and Daisy.